shooting me? You motherfucker! Ah, what? They're mid. Wait, what the fuck? Clara!
Gamers are their own worst enemies. We love games. We play them all the time. It's our hobbies, our pastimes, careers, and aspirations. And yet, we also pose the biggest threat to many games and even prevent some good games from ever having a chance at success. We like to buy games from gray market key resellers, cutting massive profits from big and small developers. We enable a toxic online culture, driving others away from games. We exploit unintended game mechanics, and we cheat in games, ruining the experience for everyone else. One could certainly look at this quality as being gamer specific, but in reality it's a product of unregulated human nature. Online gaming is really an extension of the internet's seemingly consequence-free environment. I can go be a mean, offensive person in a video game and then return to normal life with no repercussions, just like, well, most of the rest of the internet. But in games, I can also download a program that gives me an unfair advantage, use it to win, and again, return to normal life with little repercussions. Well, most of the time. And today, I want to talk about that one specific aspect of gaming culture that's incredibly destructive toward the sustainability of gaming in general: cheating. Every PC gamer I know has had many run-ins with online cheaters, whether it's someone exploiting an in-game bug to give them an advantage, breaking difficult to enforce rules, or using programs to give them godlike powers over other players. Most of us have really seen it all. And if you're an avid gamer like myself, you may actually see this on a day-to-day basis, depending on what games you play. Big-name battle royale games are popular targets for cheat makers because of their massive player base, and some games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds have banned millions of accounts for cheating. Millions! That's more copies of a game than most developers ever sell in total, and that's only taking into account the cheaters that are actually caught. Many of them are not caught. A smart or experienced cheater can probably get away with it seemingly indefinitely. Fortunately for big games like PUBG, Apex Legends, and Fortnite, the developers can afford to build anti-cheat software and upgrade account security. It's expensive though, and instead of investing that money toward new game content and polish, it goes towards fighting the war on cheaters. This can come in the form of two-factor authentication on accounts, mandatory phone numbers and personal information being tied into your accounts, programs that actively scan for the latest cheat software, player-run reporting systems, and one of the latest and most expensive approaches, pattern-based software that can detect cheats based on movement, aiming, and general habits. Sadly, a lot of the modern cheat software can get around cheat detection, so the next step is to find patterns that only persist in cheating accounts. This is often pretty complicated and specifically tuned to each game and has to be updated and tuned as the game is updated with new features and weapons. Think about how expensive that is to have that kind of software constantly updated and designed for your game specifically. Most developers struggle just with getting their games to run well, regardless of building in tons of cheat tracking software. At its base level, some of this software can detect things like macro use. A macro is when somebody has a program to initiate a predetermined sequence of keys or mouse movements to give them an advantage. For example, many games use predetermined recoil patterns for weapons. A macro could be designed to trigger whenever you fire your gun to compensate with perfect recoil control movements so that you shoot with perfect accuracy every time. Stat-based software can potentially pick up identical movements that are impossible to replicate in real life and then ban accounts that do that. But then cheat makers become smarter and begin to program in variability to their cheats, constantly learning what the software will detect as a cheat and then designing around it. It becomes an ongoing battle between anti-cheat detection and cheaters. And that's the simple side of things. What about wall hacks? A wall hack is a piece of cheat software that highlights enemy locations in the world and will show them to you even when they're behind walls. A bad wall hacker can be seen tracking players through solid objects. Most good players will look at a corner of a building as they approach, but a cheater will usually be looking through that corner directly at their enemy that they shouldn't be able to see. Pattern-based software could certainly be designed to start detecting players that are looking directly at their enemies even when there's solid objects in the way, but that gets pretty complicated, and a smart wall hacker will know how to not do this and instead act as if they have no hacks on at all. And of course, that's ignoring aimbots. Most gamers are familiar with the term aimbot, referring to a program that gives you perfect accuracy and snaps your target directly onto an enemy when you see them. This allows you to instantaneously kill your target with perfect reaction time and perfect accuracy. Certainly, it should be easy enough to detect and ban players who have inhuman levels of accuracy. Most games have stat trackers and stuff like that, so if a player's account goes beyond a certain level, then why not just ban it? However, the better aimbots can be designed to factor in what anti-cheat software will flag and then aim within an acceptable accuracy range that is still probably slightly better than some of the best players in the world. You can really see how complicated cheating becomes and how it's so much easier for cheat makers to circumvent cheat detection versus updating cheat detection. And that's just for games that can afford this level of anti-cheat software. For everyone else, which is, well, most developers, there are rudimentary defenses and then sometimes none at all. Several years back, I loaded up a game called Servarium, a stalker-like PvP game that looked kinda cool to me, but regardless of how the game was designed, trying to make an informed opinion or review was basically impossible because of the rampant hacking that was going on from day one. And this was the early beta of the game. Most PC titles nowadays have hacking on day one or day two of launch, even if it's in beta. Hacks are often designed around game engines, so if the Unreal Engine or Unity engine has aimbots designed for it already, adapting those to new games really isn't that difficult. And regardless of what you think about the quality of the Servarium game overall, the fact that I was ready to put it down and never return based on the hacking alone shows exactly how detrimental it can be to developers. And we as gamers will even blame developers for their lack of anti-cheat software. And it's because cheating really is an inevitability, just as is piracy and toxic culture. Unless it's specifically combated by developers, it's basically an expense that has to be paid in order to even have a chance at a successful game. Now, why is cheating culture so rampant, and can it be combated effectively? Well, without going down the rabbit hole of dissecting human nature, there's obviously a market for cheating. And it's hard to have a discussion about game cheating without talking about China. When PUBG was having its roughest bout with cheating, the game's designer stated that about 99% of the cheats were coming out of China. That ratio is so extreme that you really just can't ignore it. Now, I'm far from what you would call an expert on Chinese culture, but you don't really have to look far to find news and reports about cheating being incredibly ingrained in Chinese culture. Even outside of games, there are unending reports of cheating in schools or work and how it generally is more accepted than other parts of the world. And in fact, Chinese cheat makers often market their cheats as superpower upgrades that will allow you to do things that other players cannot do in games. So in a way, many of the gamers might not even be looking at it in the traditional sense of this is a cheat. This might just be a superpower upgrade for your character. That being said, it's not to say that their country isn't trying to combat the cheating epidemic. With the amount of money behind gaming and the obvious detriment to game sales and competitive culture that comes along with it, there's pressure to force authorities around the world to start writing law against cheating software makers. The reports of cheat makers being arrested and or fined are going up all over the world. Even in the US, and occasionally the cheaters themselves are fined and attacked by some of these companies. In 2017, Epic, the makers of Fortnite, sued a 14-year-old for broadcasting cheat software on YouTube and showing people where to get it. And regardless of how extreme that sounds, it's one of those things that just needs to change culturally before we understand what is considered criminal behavior or illegal activity. Things do seem to be somewhat moving toward a legal and legislative solution in most places in the world. A hard part of that right now is that a lot of current parents were perhaps not as involved with gaming culture growing up and certainly didn't deal with legal ramifications of cheating, so the idea that their kids are illegally cheating in video games is probably very far off their radar. so educating and warning young gamers about the potential legal ramifications is incredibly difficult. It's also hard not to draw parallels between cheat culture and piracy culture. Something that is often criminal, but so many people do it anyway, that taking legal action against all of them is just unrealistic. And what has happened with piracy culture since the days of Napster, back when everybody was giving Metallica flack for wanting to protect their music from being downloaded illegally? Now everybody's basically on that bandwagon. See how culture changes? Well, for the most part with piracy, the distribution game has changed and become much more accessible to most people. We can just stream on Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, or YouTube now. The costs are low enough or even free for most people, so the need for piracy just isn't as bad as it was before. But ultimately, it does still fall to the responsibility of each publisher to police their own content. That doesn't exactly sound great for the game cheating scene. It seems like cheating is more dependent on, well, culture than any sort of governing body or anti-cheat preventative measures. Small developers will be reliant on inexpensive and less effective anti-cheat solutions and will then have to opt for higher-end software if their games ever get successful on a bigger level. It just seems to be the rules of the industry and an unfortunate byproduct of success, I guess. It's an oddly self-destructive aspect of game culture that unfortunately has no promise of changing, and if it does, it'll likely take quite a while. I'd like to think that things are getting better. I stopped playing Counter-Strike back in 2003, specifically because of the cheating epidemic. And from what I hear, it's not as bad as it used to be, but then again, I'm still seeing cheaters every week, and so are other PC gamers around the world. Cheating goes up and down depending on the popularity of games. Sometimes it's manageable, sometimes it's barely playable. It's a difficult subject matter when looking back 15 years doesn't necessarily paint a totally different picture. Cheating has become more rampant than before, but we've also got better anti-cheat measures. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis, but it is a problem. It's something that I don't know if it'll ever be fixed without severe government intervention or massive crackdown and punitive measures. It's hard to say, and whether or not that's even the right approach to combat something like this. Anyway, I think it's a really interesting subject, especially considering how much has changed over the last 15 plus years in gaming, but cheating still seems to be right there by its side. Are we just destined to always have cheating subculture tagging along right there with gaming for the end of time, or will something actually change down the road? Let me know what you guys think about this subject matter in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.